What? What? It's new video. Let's go see.
Ellie had always been the type of person who sought out growth. Ever since she was young, she'd been driven by a desire to do better, to push herself beyond the limits of what others believed she could achieve. But lately, everything had felt stagnant. Her efforts, her hard work, her discipline, none of it seemed to be producing the results she'd hoped for. It was the same feeling she had when she first started her fitness journey. She'd been hitting the gym for months, following a strict routine of cardio, weight training, and clean eating. Every day, she would wake up at 5 a.m., lace up her sneakers, and run for an hour. Afterward, she'd hit the weights, pushing herself to lift just a little bit more each time. It felt like a grind, a necessary grind if she wanted to build the body she dreamed of. But the scale didn't budge. Her clothes didn't fit differently. She didn't feel stronger or leaner, not in any tangible way. And that lack of change was beginning to gnaw at her. The doubts crept in slowly at first. She'd stand in front of the mirror, studying her reflection. She didn't look any different from a month ago. Not a single inch of fat had melted off. It was like she was stuck in place. She'd been told that results would come if she just kept pushing, but all she saw was the same face staring back at her, the same body that wasn't quite what she wanted. Why am I not seeing results? She'd ask herself after every workout. It wasn't just fitness that was frustrating her. It was everything. Her career seemed to be moving at a glacial pace. She'd been working on a new project for weeks, but no one had acknowledged her efforts. Her friends were busy with their own lives, and her social circles felt distant. And worst of all, she felt like she was running out of time. The feeling of not making progress, of putting in all this work only to see no change, was one of the most isolating feelings Ellie had ever experienced. It made her wonder if all the effort was pointless. Maybe she wasn't meant to reach her goals. Maybe other people had some kind of secret that she didn't know about. Maybe they were born with a spark that gave them results, quickly, easily, without all the hard work. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this, she murmured one morning as she sat at her kitchen table, looking at her half-eaten breakfast. The thought of skipping her workout that day, of not bothering to push herself any further, crossed her mind. After all, what was the point? If it didn't make a difference, why bother? But then, a memory flashed into her mind. Her high school teacher, Mrs. Walker, had once told her, "Motivation comes from the work itself. It's not the results that will keep you going, but the knowledge that you're showing up, doing the work even when you don't see progress." It wasn't the first time Ellie had thought about those words, but today, they felt different. She realized something important. Mrs. Walker hadn't said that results wouldn't come. She'd just said that they wouldn't always come right away. Ellie had been expecting immediate changes, but deep down, she knew the truth. Lasting progress didn't work like that. The problem wasn't that she wasn't working hard enough. It was that she didn't know how to keep going when she wasn't seeing the results she expected. She had to find a way to push through the frustration and keep her focus on the process, not just the outcome. Ellie decided to take a step back. She pulled out her journal, something she hadn't done in weeks, and started writing. She needed to organize her thoughts and clarify what her true motivation was. Her workout routine, her career goals, her relationships, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the slow burn was just part of the journey. She started with a list. What were her goals? What did she want out of life? What did success look like? She wrote down a few bullet points, some vague, some more specific. Get stronger, both physically and mentally. Build a career that felt fulfilling. Develop deeper relationships with the people who mattered most. Cultivate patience and resilience. As she wrote, something clicked. The first thing she realized was that she had been chasing results, not the process. She'd been so focused on what she could see that she hadn't been paying attention to the small wins, the ones that were building her character and her endurance. Results were important, yes, but they weren't the whole picture. The work itself, the dedication, the small steps forward, was what mattered most. Ellie leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she felt a shift inside her. Maybe the secret wasn't about waiting for the results to appear, but about trusting that they would eventually show up if she stayed committed to the process. It wasn't about the big transformation happening overnight. It was about the accumulation of tiny victories that would one day add up to something meaningful. The next morning, Ellie decided she would change her approach. Instead of stepping onto the treadmill with the thought that she might finally see the results of her work, she would simply focus on the act of running, the rhythm of her feet hitting the pavement, the way her breath became more controlled with each passing minute. She didn't need to think about how much weight she had lost or how much stronger her muscles had become. All that mattered was that she was showing up and doing the work. She put on her workout clothes, grabbed her water bottle, and headed out the door. The air was crisp, and the sound of birds chirping filled the quiet morning. As she began to jog, she paid attention to how her body felt, how the muscles in her legs stretched with each stride, how her arms swung in sync with her movements. It felt good to just be in the moment. She didn't care about the time or the distance. She simply wanted to run. By the time she finished her run, Ellie felt something shift. There was a sense of accomplishment that didn't come from seeing a dramatic change in her body. It came from knowing that she had shown up for herself, that she had put in the effort without expecting anything in return. The satisfaction wasn't in the results, it was in the process itself. Later that day, Ellie went to work, where she had been feeling unmotivated for weeks. She had been grinding away at her projects, but the lack of recognition had made her feel invisible. No one seemed to notice how hard she was working. But now, with the lesson from her morning workout in her mind, she decided to approach her work the same way she had approached her fitness routine, without focusing on the end goal, but on the satisfaction of doing the work itself. She spent the entire afternoon immersed in her project. She didn't check the clock every 5 minutes or wonder when her boss would acknowledge her effort. Instead, she focused on each task, one by one. The small victories of completing a report, sending out an email, making a breakthrough on a problem. Each action felt significant in its own right. It wasn't about waiting for someone else to validate her efforts. It was about feeling good about the work she was putting in, regardless of whether anyone noticed. By the time she left the office that evening, Ellie felt lighter. She hadn't received any praise, but she didn't care. What mattered was that she had shown up, and she had done her best. She had taken ownership of her journey without relying on others to tell her whether she was succeeding. That night, as she sat down for dinner, Ellie reflected on how much her mindset had shifted over the past few days. The frustration she'd felt over her lack of progress hadn't disappeared, but it had lessened. She still wanted to see results. Of course, she did, but she understood now that focusing on the process would bring its own rewards. In a way, it made the wait for the big results more bearable. She could now appreciate the little victories along the way, the small milestones that were easy to overlook when she was too focused on the destination. As the weeks passed, Ellie continued to show up every day, determined to stick with her new perspective. She ran every morning, even when it was tough, reminding herself that the journey itself was just as important as the goal. She worked hard on her projects, but now, instead of waiting for someone else to notice, she took pride in the quality of her work, in the consistency she was building. And in her personal life, she made more effort to connect with the people who mattered, nurturing relationships with the understanding that these things, too, took time to grow. The results didn't come overnight, but gradually, Ellie began to see the impact of her newfound approach. Her body started to feel stronger, and the muscles she had been building began to show. Her clothes fit a little differently. But more than that, she began to feel a sense of pride in her resilience, in her ability to keep going even when things weren't immediately rewarding. Her work also began to gain recognition. Slowly but surely, her efforts were paying off. She didn't need a big moment of validation. It came in the form of small acknowledgments, a quiet nod from her boss, a thank you from a colleague. She no longer measured her success by the praise she received, but by the effort she had put in. And then, one day, she stepped onto the scale after weeks of avoiding it. It had become more of a symbol of frustration than a tool to track progress. But today, she felt a little different. She looked at the number and realized she had lost weight, gained muscle, and felt stronger. But the most surprising thing wasn't the number on the scale. It was the peace she felt in her own skin. Ellie had started this journey with the hope of changing her body, but now she was focused on changing her mindset. The results she had been waiting for were not just physical, they were mental, emotional, and spiritual as well. Weeks passed, and Ellie's perspective continued to evolve. She had learned something crucial. The journey itself was where the real transformation occurred. Every early morning run, every challenging task at work, and every intentional moment with the people she cared about, Those were the experiences that truly shaped her. Results were important, of course, but they weren't everything. The process of getting there was where Ellie found meaning and fulfillment. It wasn't that she stopped caring about results. She still had goals that pushed her to grow and improve. But now, she didn't tie her sense of self-worth to the outcomes. Instead, she found satisfaction in knowing that she was showing up, doing her best, and trusting that progress, even when it felt slow, was still progress. One morning, Ellie woke up early for her workout, as usual. The sky was still dark, but she laced up her shoes, grabbed her water bottle, and headed out for her run. As she jogged, she realized something. For the first time in months, she wasn't checking her watch, anxiously wondering how far she'd run or how fast she was going. She didn't need to track every detail. She was simply running, moving, and feeling good. There was no need for instant gratification or a sense of accomplishment that came from finishing. The joy was in the act of running itself. When she returned home, Ellie decided to take a different approach to her fitness goals. She didn't just want to push her body harder, as she had been doing for months. Instead, she wanted to nurture it. She took a yoga class, something she had never thought to try before. She focused on stretching, breathing, and connecting with her body in a way that felt restorative, not demanding. Over time, she found herself more in tune with what her body needed. She became less concerned with how many pounds she could lift or how many miles she could run. Instead, she listened to her body and respected its limits. She learned that balance was just as important as pushing herself, and in doing so, her results came more naturally. She was stronger, yes, but she was also more at peace with herself. At work, Ellie began to notice a similar shift. She had stopped seeking constant approval from her boss and colleagues. She no longer felt the need to prove herself with every project. Instead, she focused on the work itself, relishing in the small moments of creativity and problem-solving. She celebrated the little successes, like solving a difficult problem or receiving positive feedback from a coworker, but she didn't place all her happiness on those external validations. Her relationships, too, became richer. Ellie made a conscious effort to spend more time with her friends and family. She wasn't rushing through her conversations or checking her phone every few minutes. She was present. In those moments, she found fulfillment, not from expecting anything in return, but from simply being with the people she cared about. It was around this time that Ellie realized she had come full circle. The motivation she had been seeking from external results was no longer necessary. She had built something more powerful, an inner drive that was rooted in the joy of the process, the journey, and the continuous growth she experienced along the way. The changes in Ellie's life weren't dramatic or immediate, but they were real. They were deep and lasting. She had built a new relationship with herself, one that wasn't based on fleeting achievements or external recognition. Instead, her motivation came from within, an unshakable belief in her ability to show up, work hard, and trust that the results would come when they were meant to. One afternoon, Ellie sat on her couch, looking through some old photos. She smiled at the images of her younger self, the person who was always waiting for the next big milestone, the next achievement, the next validation. She thought about how far she had come, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. She had learned to embrace the uncertainty of progress. She had learned that life wasn't about waiting for the perfect results to show up. It was about continuing to move forward, day after day, with a sense of purpose and self-compassion. The results, when they came, would be a reflection of all the work she had done along the way, but they were no longer the sole reason she worked. Ellie stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the city skyline. She could see the same streets, the same buildings, but everything felt different now. She had found her rhythm. The future was still uncertain, but that no longer bothered her. She knew that as long as she kept showing up, as long as she kept trusting the process, the results would follow. And when they did, Ellie would be ready, not because she had been waiting for them, but because she had been living her life fully and purposefully, day by day. The results were just a bonus, not the point. The point was in the journey, and she was enjoying every step of it.